So you're looking for a super budget mount for your AR-15. Well, if you're looking for something of a low budget, you can't get much cheaper than around $50 or less, depending if you find this on sale or not. Currently, as of this current date, which I believe is September 24th, 23, this is about 35 bucks on Amazon, which is really inexpensive. I think regularly they're around 50 bucks. And this one I had actually bought used for about 25 bucks. So, you want to talk about a cheaper mount? I don't think you can do so. However, just because the price on this is really low, I don't think makes it a bad mount because there's some things about it that I really like and I want to share with all of you today. The first thing we're going to talk about is the weight. Just about 5.5 ounces on my scale is pretty damn lightweight. Keep in mind, this is for a 30 millimeter tube. They also offer this in, hold on one second, a 34 millimeter tube, which comes in a little bit heavier, but that's to be expected because there is more material on the cap itself. Now, there are also different heights that you can get and then different offsets you can get, so that might change the weight a little bit. But you might be saying to yourself, yeah, that's not that heavy, but you can get an Aero Ultralight for almost half the weight. Yeah, you're right, about 3 ounces. But I think this is a much more robust mount than the Ultralight. As far as bringing in another alternative for this, hold your horses. I got myself a SIG Alpha mount. This is the one that came with their SIG Tango MSR. It's still fairly lightweight, but you can see these are not identical one for one. If you want a slightly slimmer profile overall, definitely the UTG. If you want giant hex nuts, you can definitely go for something like this, but this is going to be considerably more expensive. So I'm talking about not necessarily the lightest, not necessarily the best, not necessarily anything of any particular type. I'm talking about a well-balanced, inexpensive, cost-effective mount option. So with that, let's start at the bottom like all my mount videos do, and you can see very quickly we have a lot of pick rail interference going on at the bottom. But first we got to take off this giant claw. This extremely long one-piece claw is held on by these 3 screws. Removing all 3 screws allows us to take off the one-piece claw on the side. And you can see we have not 1, not 3, but 5 different pick slot engagement blocks, which is really, really cool. And very similar to what Aero has done, they integrated where the screws actually mount up into the blocks themselves. Now you can see there is not a whole lot of meat on these corner pieces over here, which is where it's most likely to fail, meaning you put the screw in, you over torque it, it's not going to be the threads that pull out, it's probably going to be the aluminum over here on the sharp corner, which a sharp edge like this is automatically where it's going to fail first because it's a sharp point. That's why it's important to see radiuses in very high strength pieces. However, you can't have a radius over here because it'll interfere with the pick rail and thus not give you a perfect lockup. How you want the lockup to be on a pick slot is perfectly perpendicular with the blocks and the slots. So you put this on, you push forward, you torque it up, you're good to go. I guess they could have radiused the back, but then at that point it's a bit of a moot point because this would still be a failure point. Anyway, you got 3 big beefy threaded holes going through the larger 3 blocks. Then you have these 2 smaller blocks only on one side. I'm sure it's for machining costs, but really nice to see that much interference going on your pick slot. And while I have this off, we can take a look at how that's going to work. Very little slop, all things considered. You push that forward, you have a lot of engagement. A lot of engagement means you have a lot of strength. A lot of strength means you have rigidity. Rigidity means you're not going to lose your 0. As far as the other side, we have a full length claw. That is at least 4 inches long, which is really, really nice to see. And another really nice thing to see is that the head, the torque head on these screws is the same as these screws. This is the one size too low, but you can see that they're both the same. I'm a huge fan of that. If you're putting this on a gun, you want to have a little range kit. You only need 1 tool as opposed to 2 tools. That just makes life, for me, a lot easier. As far as the machining down here, it looks pretty frigging good, it must be said. There are a couple little spring passes that you can see over here, a little bit of divot, but very, very minor. I highly doubt it's going to interfere with anything. It honestly looks really freaking good. As far as the side, you can see how we have these lightning holes over here, lightening, not lightning like what comes from the ground to the sky during a thunderstorm, lightning as they want to make it lighter. Yeah, I know, I'm retarded. Anyway, UTG mount symbol right there, along with our serial number. They really went above and beyond trying to make this thing light but strong. My biggest problem with the Aero mount is that not necessarily that it's a vertical mounting clamshell system, but it's got a claw system on top as opposed to 4 screws set up like this, but vertically, not horizontally. The claw system on top, in theory, works great, but there have been a lot of reports of that being either a failure point or a slippage point. Failure as far as it breaks, or failure as far as the scope actually shifts inside the mount. You take a super light mount that's 3 ounces, put it on a high recoiling gun or a gun that you're going to beat around and throw around and abuse, and then people wonder why the scope slips. Maybe don't go with something that's ultra light. Ultra light usually means, and I've said this before in multiple things, there's going to be some sacrifices to be made. You don't buy an SWFA ultralight and expect it to be the most beautiful, wildly tactical fucking scope out there that's going to give you everything great and be super robust. No, you buy this because it's super lightweight. This is like 9 ounces. You don't buy it because you're going to throw this out of a helicopter. You buy this because you want to put this on a hunting rig, let's say, or a trainer for a kid, and just enjoy what it offers. And what it offers is really, really good and great, but you have to maintain the understanding that it's going to sacrifice one thing for another, and the other thing is weight. This manages to come in at a pretty good sweet spot as far as weight goes. All things considered, it doesn't feel that heavy, and it does look like it's got a lot of really good connecting points over here that are going to be fairly strong. I'm not going to say this is the strongest mount possible. There's going to be a balance to it. The price, the overall fit, finish, and machining to it so far seems really nice, and then its weight, and then its performance as far as holding a scope 0, and then maybe, as we'll see soon, if this thing will return to 0 well on our testing rig. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me pull one of these caps off and see what it looks like. To confirm what I was talking about earlier, this is our fastener for our base. This is our fastener for our cap, and you can see the threads are identical, which means that more than likely those Torx bits are going to be identical. Wonderful, wonderful to see. Another wonderful thing to see is the machining quality of the caps. Just look at the finish on this thing. Let me set my focus a little bit better. Look at that. To the untrained eye, it might not seem like much, but that's because it's not supposed to look like much. It's a beautiful, smooth surface. There's no high spots to see. There's no low spots to see. And we have relief cuts on the corners. So when this does get torqued down, it won't pinch over here. It should lock up beautifully on the scope tube up there. But we're going to check on that soon. As far as what the base looks like, again, there's nothing really to see. There aren't as big a relief cuts on this as there are on the actual cap itself. But as far as the overall machining of this, it looks and feels really good. But the true test is putting a scope in this and seeing how well it actually interferes. So let's do that right now. And with a little bit of movie magic, there we go. We are mounted up. And now let's take a scope that I use for a lot of my testing, the SWFA Fix 16X, put it in. You can see it already wants to slide very easily. Forward and back is easy. The finish on the SWFA is a little coarse. That's what you're hearing right now. And unfortunately, with the SWFA, it's a little hard to pick up on camera, but there's a little bit of side-to-side wiggle on this. It's just enough to know that it's there. Now, is that the mount or is that the scope? Well, fortunately, I do have another scope with a 30mm tube that I could test out. This is the PST Gen 2 525. Put this in there. It's a little bit harder for it to turn. Forward and back is still pretty easy. You could hear there's a little bit of rubbing. You can see where it's rubbing over here. But it looks like it's pretty consistent all around. And there's no real high spots that I could see on the mount itself. But look at that. The wiggle is gone. So I think we're perfectly fine with the mount. I think the SWFA is just a couple of tenths to maybe a thousandth or two smaller diameter than something like the PST. But I want to get this thing torqued down, mounted up, and see what it looks like on our setup. We are looking through the SWFA fixed 16X in the UTG Leapers mount. As you can see, we are lined up wonderfully. The torque specs from the Leapers website is about 25 inch-pounds for the caps, which is extremely high, and about 35 inch-pounds for the actual base onto the rail. They say about those torque specs. So give or take 15-20% maybe, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to stick with about 35 inch-pounds. I'm actually in between 30 and 35, which should be more than enough for what this setup is. 3 screws. I'm going to start with the middle, front, and back. Everything right now is torqued. I'm going to loosen them in the exact same sequence. The middle is now loose, the front is now loose, and the rear is now loose. We should have, you can see, plenty of movement. I'm going to push it forward on the mount, snug up the middle, snug up the front, snug up the rear, and it's torquing time. Middle, front, rear. You guys are going to see this before I do. Beautiful, beautiful performance. Again, we're going to loosen up the middle, front, and then the rear. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Yeah. Push forward on the mount. I'm going to snug up the middle, snug up the front, snug up the rear, torque the middle, torque the front, torque the rear. That is less than 1/10 of a mil off. Just about a full 1/10. All right, now we gotta split the difference. I'm gonna start in the middle, loosen that, loosening the front, loosening the rear. Plenty of wiggle room on this one. Pushing forward to engage the pick slots with those nice blocks underneath it. Middle is snug, front, rear are all snug. Torque in the middle, torque the front, torquing the rear. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I don't think I could expect more from a mount of this price point. Absolutely wonderful. This UTG mount, for the price, has proven itself to be excellent. You're talking 50 to 60 bucks. Yes, it's Chinese made, but as you've seen, 2 out of 3 times resetting back to zero perfectly, it's not half bad. And on the middle test, it was only 1/10 of a mil off. Still not that far off from what we've seen with other mounts. Now again, this is set up to not come off the gun. Once you have this torque down and in place, you should Loctite it, torque it, and leave it. But if you did decide to take it off, at least you know there's a high probability, as long as you torque everything down in the same sequence each and every time, that it'll go back to zero and you'll be off and running. I have to say, I'm really impressed with these mounts. They do come in a plethora of different colors: black, red, and blue. I don't know why you get one of those unless you're building a fancy little race gun and you want a mount that isn't too expensive. But if you're buying or building a fancy race gun, then spending good money on a good mount shouldn't be that much of an issue. But if you want to do it on the low, I think we'll offer the end user a fair amount of usability and practicality for not a very large amount of money. Mounting setup on the bottom, as we saw earlier, it was fantastic. It locks into the pick rail solid, and I really like the look of it. I like the design as well, because this is clearly an extrusion that they then just finish machining afterwards. And what that allows them to do is save money by doing less machining to it, but also save weight and have a really nice feature, which I think is more than not overlooked. A lot of mounts, one piece, have a little rib down the middle. That is designed for taking as much weight off the mount as possible. But the problem with that is, having a small rib down the middle, you can't level the scope the way I like to level it. So you take a vernier, a caliper, something like this, you come in between the mount and the scope, and then you twist up, clock the scope perfectly, torque everything down, you should be off and running. That's basically how I mount the majority of my scopes in my mounts. This, however, has a very wide base and makes this whole entire process extremely easy. The wider the base, the more likelihood you are able to see if there's any gaps between the mount and the scope, and you can get your scope leveled in the mount basically perfectly each and every time. It's a wonderful, wonderful setup. A lot of mounts don't do that, so when I do see it like this, I'm very, very happy. Truth be told, I'm quite impressed with this mount. For the price, I think this might be the best budget AR mount on the market. And that's a bold-ass claim, I know. But I am going to be running a couple of these on my AR and probably beating the ever-loving crap out of them. And if there is a problem or not a problem, I guess I'll do a follow-up video. Because for the price, I don't know if you can get much better. And with that bombshell, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.